Okay, hi. My name's Dr. Roger Cottrell, and you are
Mubin.
And we are coming to you once again, postcard from Airstrip 1. Unfortunately, we've not been talking to you for a while, and you might notice we're not in the studio. That's because I've actually been in hospital with a bad leg, and I'm housebound, so we're actually doing it from where I live. But apart from that, I think we should be okay. We have lots to talk about on this programme, not least the Makerfield by-election and Andy Burnham, obvious challenge to the Labour Party leadership and what it means. But we're having this programme under very unfortunate circumstances of race pogroms throughout Britain and, of course, the north of Ireland, which have been particularly nasty, which brings the whole issue of fascism to the fore. So we will be talking about the threat of fascism, threat from fascism, how to defeat it, and also the peculiarities of the situation in the north of Ireland, where, of course, the paramilitaries are in the mix, which makes it a slightly different scenario from the rest of from Britain and from the rest of the UK, for want of a better word. But we'll cover all that in due course, because I think the first thing we want to talk about is Andy Burnham running in the Makerfield by-election. Should the left support Andy Burnham? We actually have differing views on that. I think the left should be supporting Andy Burnham with a great deal of qualification. And then where we're more united is where we don't think that a Andy Burnham-led Labour Party will be significantly better than Keir Starmer or is in a position to deliver progressive change. But let's talk about Makerfield, first of all. It's a very different constituency from Gorton and Dalton, where Helen Spencer did incredibly well. There is no prospect of the Greens getting any significant vote there.
Yeah.
The big issue of stopping reform and stopping fascism is a big deal. That, for my way of thinking, is justification enough for supporting Andy Burnham in the election. And there's something else as well. We have 3 years to go to a general election. And I would say, let's see how good Andy Burnham is. Let's put him in the leadership of the Labour Party. Let's see if he can actually deliver change. I don't think he can, but we'll come to that in a moment. Now, you don't think we should be supporting him at all?
Yeah, I think that you mentioned fighting reform and fighting fascism.
Yeah.
I don't think these are quite the same thing.
What are the reasons for not voting for him at all?
It's not that I'd say that people shouldn't vote for Andy Burnham. It's that I don't really think that this is an important issue that the left should be fighting around. I don't think that an Andy Burnham premiership would be any different, really, to a Starmer one.
Neither do I. That one we agree.
And I think that the conflation of a single Reform MP getting into Parliament with a conflation of that with the, for example, the pogroms and things that we're seeing right now is a dangerous conflation to make. You've spoken, I think, about a reform seat, like a reform winning a seat being unthinkable, right? I think. But I have to say that it's not unthinkable. That at the moment, the perspective of the general election, the next general election, is that reform will win many, many, many seats. Yeah. And so it doesn't make sense to put all of our weight behind these right-wing candidates who are completely incapable of fighting fascism, who are completely incapable of, like, Andy Burnham says that he agrees with Nigel Farage's criticisms of the immigration system. I don't think Andy Burnham is capable, or that Labour at all is capable of providing a real block against reform. And I think all that will do is build up, as we saw in America with the Biden with the Biden presidency, that it just prepares an even larger reaction.
Yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but I mean, I always think, like, when I hear these arguments, Germany, 1929, 1933, third period. You had a situation where the German Communist Party, under the direction from Stalin and from the Stalinised Comintern, said, well, Germany's already social fascist. They're already, we hate the BS. It was the German Socialist Democratic Party that mobilised the Freikorps against the Spartacus Rising in 1990. We're already there, so it doesn't really make that much difference if Hitler wins an election. And literally sign their own death warrant on the basis of that, and that of the wider working class movement and vulnerable minorities, including Jewish people, a large number of them. And I think that we're in danger. I think the left is in danger of falling into this trap of calling the new fascism the far right, which immediately normalises it. Now, I know it's only one constituency, But Reform will have a much easier ride if Labour is still lumbered with a lame duck like Keir Starmer than someone who large layers of left-leaning people see as a possible alternative. Now, I also think it's therefore important that those people go through the experience, the actual lived experience of seeing how little difference there is between Andy Burnham and Keir Starmer. He's already capitulated a number of issues that I wonder if he might not have done if it wasn't for the fact that Simons was the person who stood down. This is the worst constituency for him to actually be fighting an election in.
It's a massive gamble.
It's a massive gamble. Whereas if he'd stood in Norwich, if they'd allowed that other guy to bloody well stand, who incidentally is going to be speaking at the Media Reform Coalition next weekend, I think then we could have gone more full bore criticising Andy Burnham, because Reform is nowhere in Norwich. It's not a... It's not, for them, this is a major success in terms of their legitimation, and that has to be resisted. And the eyes of the world and the eyes of the country are on Makerfield, because it's actually an election about who's going to be leading the Labour Party in maybe a month's time. I mean, once Andy Burnham wins Makerfield, he's going to be leader of the Labour Party.
Yeah, I think
there's no question of it. Yeah. The others are no hopers. West Streeting finally decides, he's got something principled to say about Palestine, but watered down, wants to rejoin the EU, don't we all? But why has he come up with this stuff now? Because he's trailing. He's unpopular, and he's got nowhere to go. On the issue of what a Burnham led Labour Party will be like, I think there's two things we're going to realise. One is that he's not as radical or left as people would like to believe, including friends of ours, who said, if Andy Burnham gets in, Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn can come back. No, nonsense. It's not going to happen.
Nonsense.
He's already caved in on, a number of things, but the first things he caved in on was staying within the budgetary limits that's set by Rachel Reeves and set by the bond markets. He's not going to tax the wealthy, so therefore, how the hell is he going to renationalise public services? He can't do it, so he's not going to do it. So there's no change there. There's no that well is dry. Secondly, proportional representation, which is actually, if you want to fight fascism, and we'll be talking about the possibility maybe of a Green Labour or Green something, or coalition later on, we need proportional representation, which Andy Burnham used to support and has caved in on that. Since then, he's also started to make, accommodation with Reform's critique of immigration as a problem category. And I would also point out in relation to the recent pogroms, it isn't just the fact the new fascists of Reform UK, and I think they are a fascist party, it isn't just them who've actually paved the way for these pogroms. It's every bourgeois politician making out that immigration is a problem category, framing it as a problem category, and allowing the fact the new fascists of Reform and of the more overtly fascists, this guy Lowe in his outfit on that ring, and also obviously Tommy Robinson, to actually take it a stage further. So, Andy Burnham might come over as a likeable guy. I've actually met him in the past. I used to teach in a university in Liverpool. I've always found him quite affable, but I don't think he can deliver anything in terms of his personal politics, so I don't think they're that great. There is also another issue, that alongside the expulsion of socialists from the Labour Party, and there are two of them sitting here, alongside that, you've had the encroachment, which we talked about before, of dark money, corporate finance, going into the Labour Party, think tanks where you've got people like Lord Lord Glasner, actually sitting on the same think tank, financed by Paul Marshall, that advises Reform UK. You've got people like Graham Stringer, if you want to keep in the Manchester orbit. I actually know Manchester. I went to Polytechnic there. I taught on Merseyside, which is very nearby. And, he appears regularly on GB News, which is a fascist platform. So, in that way, what they've done basically is they've created a lot of the tools, the ideological tools and the practical tools that can be used by an oven-ready fascist government from the very day that Nigel Farage takes the keys to number 10. Do you still think about things like the young woman Shamima Begin, who was actually groomed by ISIS? She was a child, had her British citizenship taken off her. more recently, this has happened to an ex-copper who lives in Russia and is obviously a Russian agent, works for Putin. But at the end of the day, if he's committed a crime, or if Shamir Begum has committed a crime, there's no evidence below she was operationally linked to terrorism. Get them back in Britain and put them on trial in a British court as British citizens. And that would apply to people who committed despicable crimes like Jihadi John, who murdered that poor bugger and cut his head off, who came from Manchester, incidentally. But treat them as British criminals. Once you give a government the right to actually take someone's citizenship off them, that is something you're offering to Nigel Farage in the future. Once you start banning organisations like Palestine Action, which is outrageous in itself, under the spurious claim that they're terrorists, Farage is already talking about anti-fascist action, which unfortunately at the moment doesn't exist, which I used to be a member of. Anti-fascist organisations, left organisations, can be criminalised right away. You know, the Revolutionary Communist Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, they could all be banned within weeks of a reform-led government coming to power, and it would have been previous bourgeois governments, including ones that claim to be Labour, counterfeit Labour ones, that have made that possible. So, yeah, you know, they have actually paved the way for all of this. And there's no doubt about that. I still think, pragmatically, as Lenin once said, sometimes you have to retreat in order to advance. I think blocking them in Makerfield and putting Andy Burnham on the spot to put his money or his politics where his mouth is a step towards building a socialist alternative.
Yeah, I think you only need to look at Andy Burnham's record as well to see what he would do in power. He voted for the Iraq War. He was instrumental in privatising the NHS under Brown.
Yeah.
He looked like he was going to be on trans rights, and then when the UK Supreme Court ruling came out, which effectively makes it unbelievably difficult for trans people even to exist in the UK.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard this described as a genocide against trans people.
Well, I know trans people who said they think about leaving the country.
Yeah.
Because this is very serious. So, yes, you're right. I mean, no, I'm on the same page.
Yeah.
Oh, I think we're both on the same page on that.
And I think the only reason why Andy Burnham has this sort of clean image as compared to all of the other MPs is because he hasn't been in Parliament. And he hasn't been near leadership. That's the only reason, right? It's nothing to do with Andy Burnham. It's simply to do with the fact that he hasn't been in national leadership.
That's
because
right, yeah.
In order to carry out the diktats of capital, in order to carry out the diktats of the bond market, you are required to do incredibly unpopular policies. And this is why every government, whether they're Tory, Reform, Labour, becomes unbelievable. Well, we haven't had a Reform government yet, but will become incredibly unpopular the moment they touch contact with leadership.
Well, you see, actually, that's an interesting one because, you see, basically, at the end of the day, I don't think you think Reform is actually a fascist party.
I don't think that a Reform government would lead Britain into fascism immediately.
No, I do.
Yeah.
And that's the big difference between you and I. I would say that within the new fascism, there is something that I would call a division of labour. If you go back to the 1980s, back to the days of the British National Party, there was a guy in there called Anthony Reid Herbert. He was a lawyer from Leicester. He led something called the British Democratic Party, which joined with the New National Front under John Tyndall to become the BNP. Overtly Nazi, old wave, Hitler worshipping, anti-Semitic, overtly anti-Semitic, that kind of the old school fascism. Reid Herbert had been the lawyer for a guy called Robert Ralph, a guy who actually tried to sell his house to a white British family and became a kind of notorious kind of like folk hero of the fascist right. But Reid Herbert was intelligent enough to realise that a fascist party in the UK, had to be kind of like election, voter friendly, come over as a respectable democratic party in inverted commas, and that there should be a division of Labour, that you then have your activist hardcore, who eventually became Combat 18, your colour guard, the BNP, and they did the kind of stuff that the English Defence League did, and that now we're seeing with these pogroms being led by fascists up and down the country. So, in theory, the two look very, very separate. Luckily, in the 1980s, John Tyndall was such a megalomaniac. He said, no, I'm going to be Führer of Britain. I want to control the bloody lot. And of course, in the end, he was just it was just a business, and he was getting money off his father-in-law, was grassing up his opponents and the fascist right to the special branch, and was a joke. But I think that the new fascists have learned that lesson. I think that there is a hygienic separation between
Like Farage and Tommy Robinson, for example.
But I think it's also largely bogus because we saw this with Marine Le Pen and Generation Identity in France. I think that Tommy Robinson can slag off Nigel Farage all he likes to get the hardcore in, and that kind of suits Elon Musk. And he says, "Yeah, it's only this is the backbone of the English working class," and of course his little friend and puppet Steve Bannon is saying the same thing, and blah blah blah. But when Farage builds an ICE in the UK,
which I think is a likely perspective,
which I think is going to happen within weeks, who are they going to recruit from? They're going to recruit from the EDL, and like in exactly the same way that the insurgents of January the 6th were recruited to ICE in the US. And these are the people who are then going to be armed or empowered to basically break down your door and do what the hell they want. And eventually, when they've done their dirty work, they will be wiped out in the same way that the brown shirts were wiped out by Hitler. So I do think on the very day that a reform government is elected, we are living in a fascist state, yes.
I do. The difference, though, is that these, the far right in all parts of the country, although they are, we're seeing pogroms and things like that now, they do make up a very small portion of the population, right? Especially when compared to the organs of the working class that we have, right? Trade unions,
I
all
agree.
sorts of things
All
like
the more reason to mobilise.
And these haven't been mobilised. We'll talk about this, but these will be mobilised under a reform government, right?
If they're allowed to be, they'll probably be banned right away. We'll be fighting in the streets.
Not without a struggle. There hasn't been a struggle yet.
Well, you're right.
There's been no fight back yet so far, right?
Yeah. But the idea that you caught a fascist government...
No, I'm not... Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that Maris used to come up with in the 1980s. Oh, get Margaret Thatcher and she'll privatise the health service and then you'll have a revolution.
No, nothing like that.
That kind of thinking is nuts. I think it was Jan... What's his name? The Greek guy on the motorbike. The guy who was the Minister of Finance under... Oh, he's quite famous.
But I think
he was saying that some of the left are thinking that way, and it's very, very dangerous.
I think reforming government is in some sense inevitable because I think if we continue to prop up candidates like Andy Burnham, who is basically just here to Manchester wash the disgraced Starmer regime by providing a new face that hasn't been in the muck.
I agree that we need to actually... Well, I don't think that they're not even reformists in the classic sense. I don't think that the soft right of counterfeit Labour is capable, willing, or even really wants to fight fascism in the way it needs to be fought. And I agree with you totally that we need to build extra parliamentary organs of resistance, work, councils of action, a bit like during the French General Strike. I've talked about the workers' government slogan several times on this programme, and I do think we need to start building that now. I think if we can get a left-leaning government into office in Britain, the sky will fall in. A bit like I know it's a work of fiction, but a bit like what happened in a very British coup. And we then become the people who come forward and say, right, if you want to stop Britain going fascist, you want to stop the Civil War, you've got to mobilise us to do it. And we want things in exchange. And what we would be able to argue then very, very easily would be, look, big capital are taking money out of the country or going to try and take the money out of the country. They're going to do everything in their power to destabilise our government. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that the Americans could try and snatch someone like, say, I don't know, Zach Polanski, if he was Prime Minister, in the same way they did with Madeira in Venezuela.
That would be quite fantastic.
It depends how many allies they've got within the security forces of this country.
Yeah. And
it depends on how strong the fascist right can be mobilised to that end. I don't think it's under. They're more likely to try and screw the economy up. I agree with you, or go for assassination. But it's still quite likely that something like that's going to happen. And the only way you're going to stop it is by some kind of state of emergency. Right now, we're seizing your assets right away because you're actually trying to undermine a democratically elected government and push that government much further than they themselves presently want to go. I mean, we talked the last time about. With Zach Polanski. Well, Zach Polanski is not a Marxist. He actually thinks you can actually disengage bond markets from influencing politics without actually expropriating hedge funds.
Yeah, and he has this plan of...
That's utopian nonsense. And you're only going to be able to stop these people by taking away their wealth, expropriating them without compensation. Nobody at the moment stands for that, apart from... Marxists like us. And whatever our disagreements, we actually think that is a foundation for social transformation. And I think that, as in Germany in the 1930s, the anti-fascist struggle is now the key to the struggle for socialism.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, no, if you look at that, Zach Polanski has all these wonderful reforms, right? And a lot of them would be brilliant. But if you look at his plan for how to finance them, a lot of it is borrowing. Now, borrowing from who?
Yeah, exactly. And also
borrowing from capitalists,
but this was also,
to attack capitalists. Why would they let you? Why would they lend you the money?
But in all fairness, he's not unique there. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn was saying the same thing. And the main reason why we were unconditionally supporting Jeremy was because of the attacks on him from the right. I mean, actually, a lot of Jeremy's politics were quite weak. He believed in public borrowing. He didn't believe in wholesale expropriation. Zara Sultana does. She's talked about wholesale nationalisation without compensation. Power to her elbow. But she's a bit of a one-woman band at the moment because even within her own party, she's completely marginalised.
Another difference, I think, of opinion between us is the question of whether the Greens should stand down in Makerfield.
Yeah.
Now, as far as I'm aware, the polling, rough numbers, are about Andy Burnham has about 50%, Reform has about 40%, Restore has about 10%, and the Greens are about 2%. So clearly the Greens do not stand a chance of actually winning in this election.
No, that proves the deposit as well.
However, I do think it was the right call for them to stand a candidate. And I think this was most clearly seen in the BBC Question Time programme, where the main attacks against reform came from the Green Party. Andy Burnham did not make the arguments well, or refused to challenge a lot of the points of reform. And it was the Greens who brought the main brunt of criticism against reform. And I've, from what I can see of interviews, that programme has been quite influential in getting women especially away from reform, exposing the disgusting policies and disgusting attitudes of reform. I don't think there's a serious chance of the Greens. If anyone's splitting the vote right now, it's Restore and Reform. If Reform don't win this election, it's not because of Andy Burnham did anything special. It's because of the split
in the fascist right. Yeah,
right. Which
there's been a lot of talk about that actually on the
and also of Reform moving closer towards the Conservatives, bringing Conservatives in.
I think that this joker, this what do you call it guy, the crypto boss who is basically pays finances to the guy based in Thailand. Yeah, right. Anyway, this guy, we all know who we're talking about. I think he would actually much rather the Tories and Reform be encouraged.
Yeah,
because that was his original position in 2011 when he started bankrolling Reform. Because he knows actually that they're completely inexperienced in terms of politics. Now I know there've been a lot of defections. But apart from the power-hungry Suella Braverman, they're all failed politicians who've defected to the Tory party. Whereas actually, I detest the Tories, but they have experience of government. And I think that the way that he's looking at it, this guy in Thailand, who was their major financial benefactor, along obviously with Paul Marshall, who of course owns GB News, bankrolled from the United Arab Emirates, I might add, through his hedge fund. These people who are the oligarchs, the big capitalists who are backing reform, would prefer that they were in coalition with the Tories. And I think you're right about that aspect of the analysis. You're also correct to the point that you made off screen earlier on, that not being able to win an election is no reason of itself not to field a candidate. However, I do remember going back to the 1979 election, first election I ever voted in, and 1983, although the main reason why Margaret Thatcher was elected was A, because of the Falklands War, and B, because of the Social Democratic Party, who were a CIA creation, the fact that the WRP fielded candidates was completely pointless and adventurist. Okay, it wasn't their money, it was Libyan money, so they just money to chuck it. Oh, who cares? We'll put as many candidates as we can. We'll put Vanessa Redgrave up here. We'll put Corinne Redgrave up here. But it was ultra-left lunacy. The sociological constituency of Wigan in general and of Makerfield in particular, compared with where Helen Spencer won in Gorton and Denton, is completely different. For me, the parallel, I come from the Midlands, it's like Birmingham, Coventry, Leicester are quite progressive, kind of multi-ethnic, strong trade union tradition, blah, 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 blah. You go over into the Black Country, into places like Tipton and places like Dudley, and it's very different. And in a way, your Makerfield is more like a Dudley. And I think it's almost pointless for the Green Party to be fielding candidates other than the point you just made, which is a valid point, which has given me food for thought. So I'm kind of agnostic on it now. I'm thinking about it. But I didn't see that much mileage in the Green Party fighting that level. When in actual fact, getting Andy Burnham as leader of the Labour Party and putting him on the spot, that will take a lot of people who we know who have illusions in him. I mean, like, for example, I think if we could mention Martin Shanahan. I don't think you'll mind us using his name. Yeah, he's not an unintelligent guy, but he's one of these guys who says, "Oh yeah, get Andy Burnham in, and all the socialists will be allowed back in the Labour Party, and it'll be back to like at least Neil Kinnockism." No, it won't. The thing is that the Labour Party is structurally now lost its organic connection to the labour movement. It is another bourgeois party. The last throw of the dice was when Jeremy had a realistic chance of becoming leader. And we got 3 years to make that point. 3 years to make the point that we need a socialist alternative, which may hopefully come. Certain for a lot of its constituency will come from the Green Party. I don't know how all these things are going to play out. I still am relatively optimistic that a leftish stroke, I can't even call them, I call them soft left because that's what other people call them, could be the best outcome of an election, and that it would be better. You've actually raised a very worrying point, and that is that maybe Labour would go in coalition with the Conservatives.
Yeah, this is the other thing. So Caroline Lucas has proposed that Greens stand down in Makerfield in exchange for proportional representation. Now, I think, honestly, proportional representation is a dead duck. Its main purpose now is to save the main two parties who have completely collapsed and allow them to retain some of their seats. And it would also allow Restore, which is much scarier than Reform, more seats than they would under the current system as well. As for the Greens entering a coalition with Labour, it's clear to see from here in Brent Council that the Labour would much rather enter a coalition with the Tories than the Greens. Yeah,
that's actually quite worrying. And also that's quite worrying because the Brent Labour Council was a left council compared with the Labour Party nationally. I mean, they've been quite good at me, actually, I've got to be honest. They're good for pensioners. But seriously, I mean, they do a lot of good. If you were in some Tory council, something like the Isle of Wight or something, I wouldn't be getting the stuff I get. So it is a worrying thought, but it's never been beyond the realms of possibility. And I could hear the justifications. For example, I remember when the Liberal Democrats got David Cameron elected, there were people saying, well, there would have been a much nastier government if the Liberal Democrats hadn't taken the hard edge of, well, what do you get the next election? David Cameron's in. And then you got Brexit. And then from then on, it just goes worse. And you got Boris Johnson. I need to have a shower now because I should mention his name. No, this idea of placating reaction in order to stop something worse coming down, then all you're doing is buying yourself some time. You're kicking the problem you're kicking the can down the road, but eventually you run out of road.
But that's what I think we're doing with Andy Burnham.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but I think it's an interesting point to make. I mean, I don't think we're going to resolve this.
No, me neither.
Because we don't agree on it. But I am actually kind of in two minds now. Also, bearing in mind, I'm a recent convert to the Green Party. I shouldn't be. First thing I should be talking about is probably not surrendering an election and not fighting an election. But I am trying to think strategically as well. And I've got a long memory. I remember the way the WRP fielded candidates against Labour completely inappropriately, helped Margaret Thatcher to power. We all know, I think, that by that time, Healy was being manipulated because of his abuse of young women. There must have been MI5 and MI6 agents inside the WRP. The fact that he didn't come up with a strategy calling for a workers' government during the general strike, even though they had massive influence GLC campaigns, they controlled councils in London. They could have brought those struggles together and the struggle against the poll tax a bit later on. They didn't do it. And that's got to have a lot to do with the fact that they were being manipulated. And I remember that. But we won't go too far down that route because I think we can do a separate programme on groups that have either been manipulated or have been literal state inventions. And one of the rather unfortunate thing about the organisation you're a member of is, for me, when I hear RCP, I think Frank Ferrudi, and I think the MCC Brussels think tank, which is now the most dangerous think tank in British and European academia, indirectly financed by the Russians through an initiative in Hungary. And it's not been closed down by the Hungarian government. all will happen is that the Russians will still carry on financing, and so will the Western oligarchs. They were now the main backers of the new fascism, both sides of the Atlantic. Again, another program. We've got so much stuff to talk about. We can't do it all in one program. Don't let me a bit away from what we were originally talking about. Yeah, I think the jury's out on whether the Greens whether Caroline Lucas was correct or whether the Greens were right to actually field a candidate. It's also academic, because by the time you see this, it's possible the election could have happened.
I aim to have this out pretty quick. But
well, I have every faith in your ability. But the thing is, at the end of the day, look, it's a done deal. They're running. And I'm not living in Makersfield, so I don't have to make a choice. I luckily live in Brent, and I can vote for who I like. You wanted me to talk about Northern Ireland?
Yeah, we can do.
Because that seems to... Yeah. Now, we have had pogroms throughout the UK, and we'll use the term UK now. I mean, I know that that's a contentious point for...
Northern Ireland is part of the UK.
Yeah. Whether or not it should be, not another matter. Yeah. But, yeah, it's part of the UK. We've been talking about pogroms in Southampton, and we've been talking about pogroms... There's also somewhere else you took.
Yeah, so there's been pogroms in Glasgow with people shouting "White Lives Matter." Then there was an imam in Bolton, I believe, near Manchester,
North Manchester,
his imam's house was firebombed. All caught on camera, so you can go look at that.
Right, but also we've had a situation in Belfast
for a number of days.
A bit like in Southampton, a horrible attack and horrible circumstances have been hijacked by people who don't give a damn about Ogilvy and his family. And we hope that he recovers. I mean, being stabbed in the eye is pretty horrible. The different equation there is that while it is indeed people like Tommy Robinson, who's currently in Russia, and his backers, who are, the likes of Steve Bannon and Robert Mercer and Elon Musk, and the rest of the tech oligarch gang that support the new fascism and its immediate social basis, although he is inciting that violence in exactly the same way, you do that in the north of Ireland or the northeast of Ireland, and you've got paramilitaries immediately in the mix. Now, if you go back to the 1980s, the mainstream paramilitary groups, the NF and the BNP tried to attach themselves to these groups. And the NF and the BNP were much more enthusiastic about this than the Loyalists, many of whom were of a generation that fought during the Second World War, and basically told the fascists to get stuffed. You then had a crisis within Loyalism, coming from the Anglo-Irish Agreement in 1985 that worked through the paramilitary groups were fragmented, a lot of the old UDA leadership were put into prison. We had the rise of people like Johnny Adair, who'd actually been in the National Front before he joined the UDA and took control of C Company. You later had a split within the UVF leading to the LVs. And these organisations were much more overtly fascist. That situation has been amplified since the crash of the economy, because the Good Friday Agreement, to a large extent, relied on cross-border cooperation with the Republic of Ireland during its Celtic Tiger phase, when Irish capitalism still seemed to be doing quite well. And also, of course, by Brexit, which actually brings the whole ugly business of a border in Ireland into account. The UVF leadership, Dave Irvine died, and that was a major setback for any kind of progressive thinking within Loyalist ranks. So even people like Billy Hutchinson, who at one point was talking to the Socialist Party in Ireland, on the face of it, quite left-wing, but with paramilitary links that David didn't really have, he suddenly backs away from saying, well, I voted for Remain, but that's a dead duck now. The important thing is there can't be a border between the rest of the UK and Northern Ireland, and so on and so forth. So the whole narrative within Loyalism, where working class politics are quite weak anyway, has shifted much more to the right. And the paramilitary group, even the UVF, is now split. In East Belfast, the UVF is now no longer taking any instructions from the from Winky Irvine and the UVF Army Council or the Progressive Unionist Party, and they've been involved in race attacks for some time. Partly as part of a wider project of fascism within the UK, but also, given that basically the UDA in particular and the LVs are criminal gangs, it suits them that people are out rioting on the streets, because then they get on with their drug dealing and their criminal deals, often with dissident Republicans, by the way, because the PSNI are locked down, preventing communities from being burned out and destroyed. And I think we're seeing both those things come together as a perfect storm in the north of Ireland at the moment. My position has sometimes been controversial in the past, for someone who's a socialist Republican, in that over the years I actually developed quite strong contacts with layers of the loyalist leadership who regard themselves as socialists, David Irvine being the obvious one. I've been slagged off for this particular people like Larry O'Hara. I've been called a closet loyalist, a closet unionist, given the UVF a Marxist gloss, all these kind of things. Actually not true. I mean, but I knew that to build these people's trust, it was important not to keep banging on about United Ireland, but talk rather about a united working class. Now, we have reached a point now where that's beginning to fall on deaf ears. I do think I was a little bit naive in my hopes that the PUP could decouple from its paramilitary roots and become part of the component of the struggle for socialism in Ireland as a whole. I will also point out that in the Republic, you've had a split between Sinn Féin and the Unity Party under Peadar Tobin in Westmeath, who is now overtly fascist down there, calling asylum seekers and Ukrainian refugees a new plantation by the EU. They've actually collaborated in demonstrations in Belfast where you've had Union Jacks and Tricklers side by side, and dissident Republicans in Derry have also threatened immigrant communities there. So there is fascism on the other side as well, and a lot of the left in Britain are uncomfortable saying that. That being said, the loyalists have the much longer provenance when it comes to those kind of links with British fascism, certainly since the 1990s. Billy Wright had links with Combat 18 because he was frozen out by the mid-Ulster UVF from any access to the weapons they were bringing to the country. So he starts talking to Combat 18 gun runners like Eddie Wicker. Those connections have built up over decades and have fed into the crisis that we now have. So the situation in the North of Ireland is a bit unique, but it does form part of the wider pattern. And of course, loyalists have always been very hardline pro-Zionist. They identify with the State of Israel as a colonial state, where they're in the same position as us, surrounded by enemies, blah, blah, blah. And you just got to look at you've got to, say you went to a derby in Glasgow, the Rangers supporters have all got the bloody Star of David up there, and the Celtic supporters have all got Palestinian flags. So these things are all feeding into each other. We're living in scary times. Yeah.
I think one thing I want to touch on is how do we fight the far right then? How is the working class supposed to fight the far right?
Okay. Our position in anti-fascist action in the early 90s was we can't wait for the trade union movement to build workers' defence squads. Or we need to build them now, right away. However, the reason why, apart from the criminalisation of AFA after the Baltic Exchange bombing and after Patrick Hayes was found to be an IRA member, which we didn't know, and after people like Larry O'Hara, I hope he's listening, vilified Leeds AFA and trying to make out that they've all been infiltrated and manipulated by the MI5. This, by the way, went while he's mates with flipping Patrick Harrington, but we won't go into that. Or maybe we will. But these things didn't help AFA. But the real reason why AFA basically ceased to exist, just as the English Defence League came along, is that it never built an organic link to the trade union movement. These things are not mutually exclusive. You build workers' defence squads. You use, if you like, it comes back to this idea about the crisis of consciousness versus crisis of leadership. Direct action raises class consciousness, but it cannot, of it on its own, transform society. So what you have to make that transformative link, you have to put these councils of action, which could possibly become Soviets at one point, but to start with, they'll probably be quite small, and get trade councils and individual trade unions to back those things, and also other community initiatives as well. You link it very clearly to issues like housing. For example, a lot of the arguments against immigration are that there's a housing crisis. Well, yes, because there's empty properties owned by oligarchs that are lying vacant, and in some places, like near here in Harrow, that have been empty so long they're full of rats. And that's why you've got homelessness, not because of immigration. Immigration doesn't affect it one way or another. And those arguments are going to be made plain and hard and clear to the wider Labour movement. So you link the issue of fighting racism and fighting fascism to the general programme, the wider programme for social improvement and social justice.
And I think to any viewers, the call is to get organised, right?
You've got to be, whether you believe in democratic centrism or not, or whether you believe in whatever. I mean, I'm quite jaundiced about that now, but some form of organisation is absolutely vital. It's life or death. Things have never been so bad. I mean, when I was of Bean's age, I really thought the revolution was around the corner, and then the miners' strike came along, and all my adult life, I've lived with defeat after defeat after defeat. And that's what's got us to where we are. This situation we're in now, gravest crisis of capitalist history. Basically, it was living on borrowed time for decades due to what's called fictitious capital. We're going to do a whole programme on that at some point. But also with the erosion of class consciousness following the defeats of the 1980s, the disconnection of the working class from its own history of struggle. This has all paved the way for where we are now. And we're actually, the clock is ticking. We really need to start, in the words of Rage Against the Machine, taking the power back.
Yeah, this weekend I think there's going to be a number of anti-racist protests all over the country, in Sheffield.
There are indeed. This will probably not go out in time. But yeah, retrospectively, it's not going to be the last one, and it's got to happen. It really is important.
Go there, find an organisation.
Yeah, find an organisation, and keep the struggle going, because, this is it. We're in the make or break situation at the moment.
Yeah, if there's anything you'd want to promote.
Yes, Media Reform Coalition, of which I'm a proud member, is holding its annual conference at Westminster University's campus, their Melbourne campus, which, if you know it, is quite near Baker Street Station, quite near the Metropolitan, and quite near the Globe pub. If you hang left down that road, it's just down there. And the guest speakers, it's always a good venue. A lot of good people are going to be there. Something else that we know, which has actually quite recently happened, is that Zioto is now as a UK platform. There are some fantastic people working for that. Grace Blakely is there. Owen Jones has joined it. Some big hitter from ITN is there. Peter Oban, who I've actually slightly used to work for the Daily Telegraph, but now works for Middle East Eye and Declassified UK. He's there. Your chap in Norwich, who's going to stand down in favour of Andy Burnham. He's one of the guest speakers as well. So that's on Saturday. What is the date next Saturday?
That would be the 20th, I believe.
Yeah, is it the 28th? Check on the. Yeah, it might be the week after that. Okay, check it out, because the thing is, I've been going to these conferences every year since the end of COVID, and one thing that is really important in terms of the rise of fascism and the new fascism and reactionary politics in general is the corrupt and toxic relationship between media and political power. I have for a long time been talking about something which I call the new rules of the manufacture of consent. Okay, I borrowed that bit from Noam Chomsky, of whom I'm not a fan, but using his template as a foil, because I think he's wrong about most things, I've put together my own theory on how right-wing politics are manufactured in the age of the spectacle, as Guided Board calls it, and contribute to the crisis of consciousness of the working class. Right-wing ideas get formulated by foundations within a corrupt and market-facing university sector. Then those ideas get ventilated for popular consumption through think tanks, very often containing the same people. These go to opinion formers, whether in the broadcast or legacy media, print and broadcast, or online in terms of conspiracy theorists on the internet. Both are then amplified because of declining newspaper circulation and less people watching the news on social media platforms that are owned by tech oligarchs who are the main backers of the new fascism. You then get the tyranny of the algorithm, that more kind of neutral news outlets follow whatever's trending on social media. So even the BBC will talk more about immigration and the housing crisis. We'll mention Nigel Farage more often than Zach Plansky, and so on and so forth. In that mix, of course, then you've got things like people like the BBC being, Dominic Cummings put that, what's his name? Robbie Gibb in charge of onto the BBC board of directors, with an agenda to prepare for privatisation, who collaborated with Paul Marshall and Donald Trump in trying to sue Panorama and sue the BBC over a programme which correctly said that Trump had incited a fascist coup on June the 6th. That all feeds into this kind of problem of kind of the new rules of the manufacturer consent. The two things that Chomsky refers to that are still valid are when he refers to FLAC and when he refers to the common enemy. FLAC would now include things like SLAP, the ability of corrupt and powerful to criminalise investigative journalism, to threaten people like Carol Cadwalder with punitive legal fees, even if they know they're not going to win the case. They can grind someone down and shut them up. There are also physical threats to journalism, of course, but not so much in this country. We have had journalists murdered, like Jill Dando and Simon Regan, for trying to expose the paedophile ring back in the 90s. But you're more likely to be prosecuted either through SLAP or through things like the National Security Act, which now enables journalists not only to be prosecuted for receiving things like, sort of like official leakage, and of course it obviously criminalises whistleblowers of various kinds. Common enemy, immigration and Muslims. I mean, Chomsky was writing in the 1980s. He was saying communism is a common enemy that was demonised. And now it's ethnic minorities and immigrants and Muslims. But the real agenda, of course, is to keep a dying capitalist system going. And so, I taught politics and communication for years at Winchester University. I designed the module there. I think the work of the Media Reform Coalition is really important, and I would like to see you there.
If you'd like to hear more from both of us, Roger has a Substack, which I'll put in the description.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'm streaming on Twitch now in the evenings, on weekdays mostly, so about 7 p.m. Tune in.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And we will see you soon.